What's up, Fisher people? Just dusting off the old guitar before another Q&A video. Because why not, right? Why not? So we got some more questions, hopefully some more answers. We'll dig into that, but first, a few housekeeping items. First of all, if you're interested in being a part of the Patreon group, I'll leave a link to that down below. Got some cool stuff and some perks that you can sign up for. Second of all, thanks to everybody that, bought a copy of the book, and especially to those of you that reviewed it. And if you did buy it, I'd be super grateful if you would consider reviewing it, because it helped the book become visible for other people, which not only might help sales, but also gives people that are looking at it an idea of whether or not they would actually enjoy it. A lot of people look at reviews for a lot of different things, and reviews can be very helpful in that regard. And if you haven't bought it, well, I think you should, though I'm probably a little biased. Also, recently, I did have a couple requests from some Airbnb and lodge type places, asking if they could get copies of the book, basically, like a coffee table sort of thing, or sitting at front desk or something, like for guests to read. So I was like, that was an idea I hadn't really thought of yet. So if you know of any lodges or Airbnbs, or maybe you have one, that might want some reading material, some fishing related reading material for their guests, yeah, let me know about that. That was a cool thing that came up recently, so maybe more of you guys have a need for something like that. Let me know. And of course, as we're getting closer and closer to the next fishing season, if you're looking to book a trip, you should start thinking about doing that soon. Some of the best dates are starting to fill up, especially the most popular times. And we do have a calendar now on the website, so you can see exactly what's open and what's not. So it makes some of the back and forth a little easier when you know exactly what you're working with. So think about Patreon, think about the book, think about booking a trip. Otherwise, if you want some of your own questions submitted for another Q&A video, you can also do that by contacting me at the website on the contact page. So now, housekeeping over. Question time. Here we go. Ooh, that's more questions than I expected. Just a heads up, like last time, have not read any of the questions beforehand, except for, again, one that I know of that was submitted by text. So hopefully I got some answers for this stuff. First question comes from the OG patron, Roger Harper. Thanks, Roger. Generally, where on Lake Sakakawea do you most often find the most continuous productive walleye fishing areas, regardless of time of season? Are these areas accessible by shore fishing or only by boat? That is a tough question to answer because of the way the fish migrate up and down the system. That said, when you get towards like late summer and the fish have kind of done most of their migration, the whole system can be good. If a spot on the lake is going to be good, it's going to be good by that time of year, is the way to say that. And if it's not good by the middle of summer, then for some reason the fish haven't made their move down there. Maybe the bait isn't moving down there. Like this last season, we struggled on the east side because the smelt just didn't move down there. The east end was pretty tough late summer all through the fall. So outside of that, that's a tough question to answer. But in terms of by shore fishing or only by boat, your best shore fishing is definitely going to be in the early season. Once you start to get past early summer and you get middle to end of June, you might have some luck shore fishing for pike or smallies, but walleye fishing is kind of out for the most part at that point. Maybe at dark you might get some walleyes that come into shore, but walleye fishing on Sakakawea by shore is pretty tough anyway, but definitely really tough after the fish start to move out of those shallow water locations. What size range of walleyes do you recommend that we keep to eat? And does the smaller walleye taste better than the really large ones? This is a conservation question, obviously, and somewhat of a subjective question. I definitely will say that my preference is anything much over like 22 inches, I would prefer to throw back, and anything under that is a great keeper for table fare. I do think that those 14 to 18 inch fish, even 20, taste better than bigger ones. I have carved up some 23, 4, 5 inch fish before that had pretty darn tough, grindy meat. So when you hear people say that the bigger ones don't even taste as good, like there is a lot of truth to that. The meat can be a lot tougher, especially on some older, rougher fish. For me, it's all about, you know, anybody can keep what they want to keep per the regulations. I'm not going to harp on anybody. However, my whole goal and hope is that we always have fish to catch, especially big fish to catch. And by releasing fish for the breeding stock and releasing a big fish just so it can get bigger and get caught again is something I love to do. It's why I have the raw hangers program that supports the replica as opposed to the real wall mount. Not gonna get any soapboxes, but 22 is kind of the number for me. I would prefer to let everything go. How long does it generally take you to decide to move to a different place to fish? So if you can mark fish, how long does it take to determine they won't bite? No yum yum. I would say if it's my first few spots of the day, if I'm not getting a bite in 10 minutes max, especially if there's a lot of fish there, I'm moving on. Unless I get to 4, 5, 6 spots that have a lot of fish that aren't biting, and then I might just determine it's a tough bite day, or it's a tough time of year and you're waiting for a bite window to come around, or you gotta try a different presentation to figure it out. But it's a Kakawea, usually it's a better move to keep moving than it is to sit and hammer them and change baits and try to figure out what they're gonna bite on. Is there one bait or artificial lure that you've used that you've not been able to repeatedly catch walleyes on at Lakes Kakawea, or is there one bait you'd recommend to stay away from? The one thing that I can't figure out is, I have some ideas, but I have not been able to reliably catch fish on ripping wraps. And I feel like that would be a great fun bite to do because it's very similar to jigging wraps, but they're a lot lighter and a lot easier to throw and rip. But I've caught one walleye on a ripping wrap ever. Granted, I haven't given it a lot of time to try it. My only theory is that it's a shad-shaped bait and shad is not the main forage. On the lake, there's some shad, but not a ton. That might have something to do with it. I think you'd have better luck with ripping wraps up shallow probably than you would deeper maybe. Shad can be a little bit of a shallower and even a surface-oriented fish, bait fish sometimes. And the other theory that I have is that being lighter, I don't think they fall as fast as jigging wraps, so they might not have quite as much of a triggering characteristic to them as a jigging wrap would. That's been the one bait that's been a mystery for me. Also hair jigs. Haven't spent a lot of time with hair jigs. I know other people catch fish on hair jigs. I've yet to figure that out, but I've done pretty well on jigs and minnows, so I haven't worried about it. How often do you use leeches, and is there a time of the open water season they seem to be more effective? I've definitely used leeches. I haven't used them as much as night crawlers just because during the summer, night crawlers are so good. I haven't found a lot of reason to have both in the boat at the same time. It's one thing to have minnows and crawlers, but to have crawlers and leeches, they're kind of a similar bait. I will say though, it really starts to turn on late spring, early summer if you're going to use leeches, and then all the way into the summer. You know, midsummer is a great time for leeches, and it's also really good if you're sitting on sluggish, stubborn fish. Either slip bobbering or vertical jigging leeches can be really good. I've had plenty of luck pitching jigs with leeches too, but I really like leeches if I'm slip bobbering around structure, timber, trees, that kind of stuff. Leeches are great out there. I just, as a guide, I have to look at my costs. So to have leeches and crawlers and try to keep both alive doesn't always work for me. I usually just stick with crawlers. Is it possible that you can do more videos with Randy at Ripping Lips Adventures? Yes. I wish we could do 20 videos together every year. It's been harder to get our schedules together lately. Although we do have something we've been holding back, that we have a video coming up. It was shot last year. We were gonna do it this year, but Randy got tied up with another project. So I think we're gonna release it probably in the spring to kind of warm up for the open water season. And I actually have a teaser trailer video coming up for that before we release the whole thing. So something to look forward to. And yes, I hope to do more videos with Randy. You know, it's tough with scheduling sometimes, but I would fish a bunch more with Randy if we could. Love fishing with that guy. How does the time of season, weather, and water temp affect your selection of spinner you use on bait rigs? Like, does your selection of color and blade type size play into your decision? Spinner blade size, general rule of thumb is start small early season and get bigger as the year goes on. And I do think sometimes bigger blades catch bigger fish. And in terms of the one thing I have noticed, I really like a hammered silver type of color if it's a cloudier day, and a more of a gold or even those burnt oranges on sunny days. Other than that, there's a handful of colors that I really like, which are silver, gold, chartreuse, and orange. And I don't really deviate a whole lot from those four. Usually one of those four works pretty darn well, and I start the day out with one of those on each person's line typically. The other thing I'll throw in there too is I like to use the smile blades or butterfly blades earlier in the season, or if the fish get a little finicky later in the season. Do you have any experience or can provide us any advice on catching burbot in and around Sakakawea? No, never caught a burbot, but if you're gonna catch them, they're gonna be at the tail race more than likely. Randy actually has caught a burbot or witnessed somebody catching a burbot down at the tail race. That's the best place to get them. There might be some burbot in the lake, but I've definitely never caught one. I know a bunch of people that have caught them at the tail race though. How much fuel for your boat would you say you go through in a season? I'll bet it's a lot. Oh geez, okay. I was in now this is boat and vehicle, but I was in the 5 figures almost purchasing fuel this year. So yes, it's a ton, and a lot of it has to do with last year we were running. I'm based in Garrison, but I was running out west a lot, so that burned a lot of fuel in the vehicle. And Sakakawea, sometimes you have to move a lot to find fish, and moving in your boat burns a lot of gas. So Sakakawea is not kind on the wallet for gas prices. Can you add a calendar on your website? Okay, yeah, I already addressed that actually. We do have a calendar now, so there you go. What things do you prepare for a day of fishing? Like, what do you check on your boat and trailer? How do you prepare for food and hydration for yourself? How does time of year affect your preparation? Ooh, this is good. Okay, so you don't want to do anything stupid when you're launching your boat, and it's very easy to overlook things. So one thing that I always do, like there's a handful of things you have to do before you launch your boat. Everybody has a different methods. People have different trailers. Some people have Dorado latches, all kinds of stuff, right? But whatever your checklist is, double check it. Right before you get in the water, double check everything you think you just checked, because 1 out of 10 days, I would say, I'm out there and I think I've done all those things, and I go back and I look and I miss one of them. Especially double check the plug. Make sure your plug is in your boat, for crying out loud. So there's that. And then when you get in, if you're super early season and it's a cold day, or super late in the year when it's cold, things can start to freeze. Make sure you have some sand or some salt, some ice melt at the ramp in case the ramp gets wet. When you're pulling out of the ramp, make sure to try to drip off your trailer before you pull up too far, so you get more water off as possible, so you don't ice the whole thing up. And then when you get home at night, try to dry everything out as much as you can so it doesn't freeze over. You don't want your live well frozen. You don't want your live well pump frozen. So many things can freeze. You don't want your bilge pump frozen or something crazy. So ice is another thing that it just takes so much more time. In terms of my body personally, staying hydrated out there is such a big deal, especially if it's a windy day. You don't feel like you're getting dehydrated because you don't feel yourself sweating, and the wind's constantly drying up all the sweat. So I use a product that's called Replay Hydration, and I get it on Amazon, and it's the best hydration drink that I found. And if you're coming out of my boat, if you're booking a trip, make sure you have enough things to stay hydrated, for crying out loud. Stay hydrated. What do you do to get your boat ready to store it over the winter months? And what do you do when you bring it back into service? So I installed a garage heater this year. So if you have a garage heater, you don't have to do a lot of stuff. You got to do your normal oil changes, and that's about it. But if you don't have a garage heater, you want to make sure you're doing winterization. If your boat's going to spot where it's going to freeze really cold, and or freeze and thaw, that's going to do some damage to a lot of things, especially if it's, so when people winterize boats, they do things that drain all the water completely. They use some sort of antifreeze component. They use what's called fogging the motors. I'm not super familiar with what that is, but I think it helps push out some of the water. And then when you get going in the beginning of the season, a lot of that stuff just kind of, it's done and you just kind of get out there and go. If you're in your oil change should have been part of that. But you know, there's one of those things where probably the first day out, just get out a little bit, make sure your motor's running well, take it easy, give it some time, check everything over, check your bilge problem, check your live well problem, all those things. And just make sure you're good before you get too far from the dock. What things do you do routinely to keep your boat clean? Do you use hot sauce and pressure wash after each trip, or do you have a set number of trips before you clean? What has worked for you? Yeah, that's actually, hot sauce is one of those products I have on my gear page on my website. I'll leave a link to that. I literally, and the only reason I put it on there, and the only reason I have it is because I've never found anything that gets hard water stains off of boats better. Literally, it's quite amazing. If you have really bad hard water stains, it might take 2 or 3 or 4 applications and some scrubbing. But if it's just like a week's worth of hard water buildup, you spray that stuff on, you almost don't even have to wipe it before it's gone. It's quite incredible. But that's my best advice, is to do it frequently, because when those hard water stains build up and then dry in the hot sun and get baked on there over time, it gets really tough to get rid of it. I don't clean my boat as much as I should, but I try to do a wipe down right when I get out of the water to keep all that water from drying on the boat. And then I try to do a little bit of, like, vinegar and water can even cut the mustard if it's, there's vinegar in mustard. If it's, you know, every 2 or 3 days and it's not super built up. So I try to do that a little bit once in a while, but I probably get out the hot sauce once or twice a month to take care of the heavy duty stuff. And if you, every once in a while, add a little bit of wax, do a couple wax coatings a year, that helps a lot too. How does chasing the bite affect your fishing location selections? You know, when people say they're catching fish at a certain place on the lake, do you ever put more credibility on what you've heard than over what your gut and your knowledge of Sakakawea tell you? I take anything that I hear from somebody, unless it's like somebody I really know well, with a grain of salt, for 2 reasons. One, you know, when somebody says they crushed it yesterday, you never know what that means. Like, did that mean they got a limit in 4 hours, or did that mean they caught 40 fish in 2 hours? You know what I mean? And I'm gonna trust what I do and what I know first and foremost, and no matter what, unless I'm really struggling and somebody that I know well is on a pattern that I hadn't noticed. But the other thing is, the fish at Sakakawea move so much that somebody saying they crushed it at one spot yesterday, there's maybe a 50% chance they're already gone. So it's something to note. I'll note more what depth they caught him in, what time of day, and what they were using than I will locations and areas. Unless it's, you know, in terms of like the migration, and they were saying we did really well in this 10-mile section. It's like, okay, now you know kind of where the fish have moved or something. That's something to maybe pay attention to, but it's always, it's good information to have, but always kind of try to figure out the process yourself and trust what you know first, I would say. What is your #1 best single advice for someone just learning to fish on Lake Sakakawea? Based on what I just said, move a lot. Move a lot because the fish move a lot. Move a lot because there are fish in a lot of different locations, but a lot of the water can also be dead. And move a lot because you want to see more spots on the lake. Like, don't get used to having a honey hole that you go back to every day, and if they're not there, then they're just not biting that day, because that's not probably the case. Don't get stuck on a spot. Move a lot, learn a lot of spots. And then, you know, if you notice a pattern where, like, okay, the fish seem to be in 15 feet of water on sand flats, in the back of your head you go, okay, I know 5 other sand flats that are just like this one that could be really good if this spot's good and it slows down, or we catch all the fish out of that pod, right? Or spook them out. So move. What advice would you give to protect yourself from sunburns out on the lake? What do you routinely do throughout the fishing season to prevent burns? I personally started finding some really lightweight, breathable pants to wear on the lake because they protect from sunburns, but also if it's a day that's kind of buggy, I hate spending all day slapping bugs off my legs. So I wear pants a lot, and then I wear a lot of these dry fit, sun shirts, but I always make sure I have a good, strong sunscreen for my face, because your nose and your ears and your forehead is what always seems to get burnt the worst. Yeah, the water just maximizes the sun exposure because it's reflecting off the water. So, take care of yourself, protect yourself, stay hydrated. Staying hydrated is also a good way to prevent really bad sunburns, but also wear some sunscreen for crying out loud. Some people like to use the face scarf thing. That's kind of popular the last 5 or 6 years now. Whatever works for you. I don't like that on my face because I feel like it's kind of, especially when it's a hot day, it's kind of encumbering, but I do put sunscreen on my face and my hands usually, and then I usually just kind of wear clothes everywhere else. Have you ever entered into a fishing tournament? If so, can you tell a little about it? The only fishing tournament I ever did was the Midwest Angler podcast had a tournament, not last year, but the year before. And it was one of those fish donkey tournaments where you enter on your phone and there's people from all over the country entered in it, fishing different lakes. And we kind of did that for fun, my brother and I and his girlfriend at the time. It was a pretty cool deal, but my dad and I sent in an application this year for the Governor's Cup. It would be the first real big tournament I will have ever fished. There's no guarantee to get in it, so we'll see if it happens. It's kind of been sort of a bucket list, childhood dream thing of mine to fish a tournament with my dad. So I'm hoping we get picked, and if we get picked, I'm hoping we can do well. But it's going to be fun regardless if we get in. I just love fishing with my dad, so we'll see what happens. And the last question that I saved for last is from the one, the only Crappie T. And he wants to know everything about snap weights, including when to use them, what baits to use with them, where to put it on the line, how far ahead of the bait, use a deep diver or not, why not just use a bottom bouncer? That's a good question. Where to get them and how heavy. So full disclosure, I have not used snap weights very much at all. I will say the advantage to snap weights is obviously to get a crankbait deeper. You're typically using crankbaits with snap weights. You could use other things, I'm sure. It's usually a crankbait thing. But you're trying to get them deeper than they dive, and you're trying to do it more vertically. Like lead core, for example, can get crankbaits down, but sometimes if you're fishing really deep, you might have 250 feet of line out, and that's kind of a pain in the butt. So snap weights, if you use heavy enough ones, can get your line more vertical instead of way behind the boat. And why not a bottom bouncer? The advantage to a snap weight over a bottom bouncer is that you can take the snap weight off really quickly, whereas when you're tied to a bottom bouncer, you're tied to a bottom bouncer, unless you're using one of those quick change ones and you snap them off, right? I've used bottom bouncers and crankbaits. I've used lead core. I've hardly used snap weights. I think it's one of those things you got to get really used to. The one cool method that I saw, I don't remember exactly what they called this. It was a guy I fished with, and I think he got this from one of the NWT pros. Basically, using a 3-ounce bottom bouncer, you can put that like 30 feet in front of the crankbait and then reset your line counter. And from that point, however many feet down you want it to go, that's how many feet of line you let out. So it's a really easy method in terms of counting. So you got a 30 feet crankbait, snap weight, 3-ounce. And then if you're fishing 25 feet of water, you let out 25 more feet of line after you reset your counter. So that's a pretty simple, easy method. But basically it's just a way to get them down a little bit further. You can always just add a 1-ounce crankbait and start letting out line until it hits the bottom and reel it up a couple of times. That works too. But I'm not an expert in it. I've not done it a lot. Where to get them? I'm honestly not sure. I'm sure a lot of places have them. I've seen them at bait shops around Garrison, I think. I'm sure you can get them at Bass Pro or Cabela's or anything online too. And yeah, in terms of where to put them on the line, typically you want, like this method was 30 feet in front of the crankbait. I think a lot of them, they're probably going to be at least 10, 20, 30 feet ahead of the bait. You don't want it too darn close. And that's that. So hopefully that answers some questions. Like I said, if you have more questions and you want them on a future Q&A, submit it to our contact page, bloemendaalfishing.com/contact. And if this was helpful for you, think about subscribing to the channel, click the like button on the video, and hopefully we'll see you next time.